Oh, a lot of them were like, "What the hell?" Like they thought it was pretty crazy, actually.
The Research Labs podcast by SundayPyjamas.
A lot of times when I see any founder trying to build something, what really makes me very curious is how was the process to find the problem that they are trying to solve. At the same time, I would also like to congratulate you for getting into YC. If you don't mind, we can also try to talk things beyond YC and beyond the company you are trying to build. The name of the company for those who are listening is Retake. How about you walk us through what is Retake? How did you uncover the problem and decide eventually that this is something we want to spend a lot of our time solving?
Sure, yeah, yeah, I'm happy to. So, Retake is Universal Search Infrastructure for Developers, which is a big mouthful, but basically what it means is if you're looking to add semantic search to your product, so like AI powered search, basically to search through anything that you might have, in your database that you might want users to be able to search, Retake allows you to do that in just a few lines of code. So essentially, the way we work is we layer on top of your Postgres database, and then we give you capabilities to do vector embeddings, vector search, and even regular keyword-based search with just a couple lines of code. So you don't need to use a separate vector database, for example, like the many that are out there, and we give you more accurate search results without needing to duplicate the data, have higher cost, so on and so forth. Typically, we're used today mostly by companies that do, I mean, you can do a wide variety of things, right? Because search is such a core component of products. But we're used by e-commerce companies, for example, for users to search for their websites or product catalog. We're used by supply chain companies for their users to search through purchase orders, for example, material codes, like anything that you have in your Postgres, right? That you would like to do semantic search on.
How did you understand that okay, this is a problem that is worth solving?
Yeah, that's a good question. So this is a problem we experience ourselves. So before doing this, my co-founder and I we started um, building sustainability software actually. So at that time I was living in Paris, and we wanted to build software for manufacturing companies to calculate the carbon footprint of specific products. So let's say you're a car company, right? Let's say you're like Volkswagen and you make a car. You might want to know how much carbon is associated with the manufacturing of one unit of this specific car, right? Of one car. This is useful for many things. Like companies will use it to try to iterate and build more sustainable products. They're also using it for calculating like certain types of export taxes and fees that are related to carbon emissions, so on and so forth. And when we were doing this, we had this huge database with tens of thousands of materials like aluminum, metal, wood, and so on. And we needed our users to like essentially provide the material composition, sort of the recipe of their product. So like all the pieces that go into the car and then match it, right? And so obviously different companies will call the same thing different names. And so we needed this sort of higher level semantic understanding on the data so that when company A says adds this thing that's called wood and this company B adds the same thing but they call it lumber, right? Like is it going to actually find the same entry in our database? And so we started using vector databases for that, and then we realized they were just not that great, and we really wish we had a product like what I described right now so that we could really easily do this on top of our database without needing to worry about spending a lot of time, data being out of sync, building search ourselves over and over again, things like that.
So when you were building the search before in the carbon, what, can you describe the problem? It helps you figure out what is the carbon footprint of a company,
Of a product for our
of a
company,
product,
yes.
and how did that come about?
How did that come about? That came about kind of randomly. We were just interested in the space. I'd done some work in supply chain before, and we talked to a lot of people and realized this was a problem. And so we started working on that.
And so when you say you started working on that problem, a lot of times when I hear problems like this, the first thing that comes to my mind is okay, what is like the first step, or who do you go to even explain to them that you need to do something like this? Because I'm presuming, and do correct me if I'm wrong, when you started this, I'm assuming 5 6 years ago, the carbon
No, 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 no. That was in March of this year.
this year. Got
Yeah,
it.
it's very
So
recent. Yeah,
so how do you even start with the process? Do you go and talk to people? Do you build something first? Do you have an MVP ready? How was that process like?
we wanted to build a company in this space, so we started talking to a lot of people and tried to learn as much as we could about the space. And then, as we talked to people and learned about the space, we discovered problems, and we set to solve them. And then we would essentially tell people, we had multiple conversations in parallel, and then kind of multiple people started telling us the same thing, independently. So we thought that was very interesting, right? And we started to pretend to people like we had a solution built, and they were like, "No way, I would love to see it." And then we would be like, "Oh shoot, like now we need to build it." And so we would build a prototype, in between the time where we had talked to them and the time we had booked like another meeting for them, right? And then we would show them our product, and some people will love it, some people will not like it, and we kind of refined it in that way on to the point where it reached what I'm describing, was sort of a final thing. But this is not really something I would like recommend doing in the way we did, because we frankly knew nothing about the sustainability world aside from like talking to people for a month or two. And at the end, I don't think it's like an industry where we had a particularly good skill set for. And so that's kind of why when there were other big players that kind of copied our product, well, didn't copy it, like they built the same thing, right? And they started doing a lot better than us just because they were really, really knowledgeable about this industry. Um, we were like, okay, maybe we should go back to things we're really good at, and that's kind of what led us to making Retake and the AI search, semantic search infrastructure that I am mentioning today.
So that was in March, and and right now it's only July. So how long did it take to actually give up that idea, think of retake, build it from ground up, and have a working product around it? I'm talking about retake particularly.
Maybe like 2 months, yeah, into it.
And when we say 2 months, we're talking you have the product up, you have some teams using it, it's tested in the industry, or it's just still an idea in 2 months.
No, no, no. With people using it and yeah, everything. Yeah.
Got it. And is this like a normal timeline though, to build something from scratch in 2 months, or are you guys really good at it?
I don't know if we're really good at it. I think we're okay at it. It depends. I think it depends so much what it is you do, right? If you're building, you know, planes, like it's not gonna work in 2 months. But if you're building software, you can get something like pretty okay in 2 months, I think. Depending on like what kind of software it is. Is this like a normal timeline? I don't know. I've heard of people pivoting faster than this, and I've heard of people pivoting much slower than this. So yeah, I think it depends.
And how was that decision taken particularly between the two of us? Is that like a whiteboard session we're talking? Like, this does not seem to be working out. Or in the sense, did you just decide, okay, let's stop this, start something new tomorrow? Or was it more like a gradual process for you guys?
Yeah, I see what you mean. It was more like a hard stop for us. I think usually when we pivoted in the past, it was more of a gradual process, but in this case, it was more of a hard stop. So there was a point where we had like a decent number of big companies that were doing sales with us, um, for a sustainability idea, and eventually, large players like SAP that you might be familiar with, essentially released a competitive version of our product, and then that was really, really bad for us, right? Because those large companies, they're all customers of SAP and they love SAP, and so they're very used to using them. So it was, a safer bet for them to go with SAP than to go with us. Um, and so at that point, things like started like going downhill very quickly for what we were working on, and we are like, okay, we should do something different. Um, and so we had a bit of a hard stop, and then kind of considered everything, talked to a bunch of people, and then reflected on like the problems we had experienced while we were working on that idea. And that's kind of one of the ways this current idea and what Retake became came to be.
How was the YC journey like from there? Did you guys have in mind that, okay, we are gonna go for YC, or it was also something like we have a product, might as well try and apply?
It's a good question. So we had already got into YC. We got to YC with our sustainability related idea that I was mentioning. But as things started slowing down, we were like, we need to do something different, and so we pivoted at the very, very beginning of YC into what Retake is today.
And I think the last time we had a conversation, we talked about the Notion note that you wrote.
Hmm.
Laying down all the things that you learned from the last company, and you had mentioned that you kind of wrote it for yourself, and you know there were a lot of broad strokes on so many various aspects of starting and building a product company. I was curious to know more about, like, that is just one page, but I think if I'm not wrong, you worked on the last company for 3 long years. And last time you also mentioned that I have not built a successful product yet, so you should not listen to my advice. And I kind of mentioned that, mm, I mean, maybe you think so, but from where I'm looking at it, I think you have a lot of things, a lot of things which, let's say, a lot of founders out there will find it to be very real and very true. And could you kind of, briefly take us on the journey of your last company, how that came about? And then towards the end, right, we can discuss retake, because that's more like what's next for you. And we can kind of talk about what happened before that.
Sure, sure. Yes, I'm happy to. I'm happy to. And I still believe what I said. I don't think anyone should listen to me. Um, but I'm happy to share the story. It's a good story. So so I graduated from university in 2020, and during my junior summer, so between my the summer before my last year, I worked at Microsoft, and I found it very boring. Nothing against Microsoft, but I found it very boring. I think I had great colleagues, but it just wasn't moving a little bit slow, basically. And so I spent a lot of time thinking, and I had the idea for this company, which ended up being called Whist, which was the first company that I started. And what we wanted to do was there was this super exciting technology of cloud gaming that was, coming to be a thing, and we were like, oh, that sounds so cool. We would love to work on it. Let's start a company that uses this technology. Big mistake, number one. You should never do this, right? I don't think starting something because of the technology rather than because of the problem is really the right way to go. And I kind of set off on the path. But basically, for 3 years, I built this company where we were doing cloud streaming. And when we started, we were helping companies stream graphic software for work. So, like architecture firms, design studios, animation studios, and so on. So they could work remotely without needing like a big PC at home. And so they could just work from a laptop. That's how we started. Over time, we pivoted into streaming only web browsers and became this kind of web cloud browser company. There was another company at the time called Mighty that was also doing something similar. That was yeah. So we were competing with them, and the both of us were working on this product, and we did that for quite a bit until December of last year. So nearly 3 years before eventually shutting down because this was just really not a problem that was really there. Um, People were essentially complaining to us that their browsers were slow, but once Apple released the new Apple laptops, like with the M1 and M2 chips, this essentially became no longer a problem. And even then, it was a very questionable way to solve that problem, to be honest. Um, so we ended up shutting that company down. That's like the gist of a very, very, very high level. But there are so many things that happen. I mean, we raised 2 rounds of funding, hired over 30 people, built this really, really complicated product. It was quite of an engineering feat. But I think the big mistake, I mean, we made so many mistakes as I laid out to this document, but in the Notion documentation. But I think the biggest mistake all along was that we were like too interested into the software and not enough in the customers, I think. So we were very, very focused on the tech, didn't talk to enough customers, didn't do enough sales, didn't do any of these things. And I think if we did, we'd realize faster that people didn't want what we were making, which was really like our biggest problem. It was our problem, it was Mighty's problem, and a couple of other competitors that were trying to build to do this. We all had the same problem, I think.
So you are kind of saying technical challenge is something that really drew all of you in? Like you really wanted to
I,
solve the
I
problem.
think
It
so.
was
Yeah.
fascinating.
I think so. It was interesting work. Because of it, we were able to convince really smart people to work with us. Like our team was crazy. People were so good. I was by far the worst person on that team. Like we hired crazy people, and they were really good. And I think really smart people want to do things that are really difficult. And what we were doing was really difficult, and so we felt a little bit validated in that. We were like, oh, we're amazing, we're solving these difficult problems, and like we're making progress. That's crazy. And all along that was hiding the fact that like we kind of just assumed this was worth solving, right? Because something is difficult doesn't mean it's worth solving. But we were like, we assumed that it was. And so we were really drawn in, and day in day out we would work on making the product work. And when we would show it to customers, they were like, oh, like it doesn't work that well, but like once it does, I think it would be super useful. And so we would keep working on it. And we did that for a long time because it took a long time to make it work really well. While all along, like people actually didn't really want it. So that was kind of like blinding us a little bit.
Could you describe in technical details what were the challenges like that you were trying to solve with that company?
Sure, there were a couple. So what we were doing for context is we wanted to run your web browser, so Chrome, essentially in the cloud on a powerful server, and then stream it to your laptop so that it wouldn't take resources on your laptop. Like if you had heavy web applications or if you had, a million tabs open, it wouldn't like slow down your machine. So first of all, we needed the video streaming to be really good, right? Because you use your browser all the time, like all the time, right? It's the primary way people engage on desktop and laptops. And so we worked for a very long time on trying to make video streaming really good, which was not easy. And we thought we needed different streaming from other people, so we're kind of building cloud gaming type streaming. That took a lot of time. At the end, it was pretty good, but it still wasn't perfect. I mean, and then something else we needed to solve was a cost related issue. So we would take your browsers, we would put them into Docker containers that we would put on virtual machines on AWS and Google Cloud and so on. And we needed those machines to be as close as possible to you, right? So that if you're based in India, we don't put your browser on a US data center because the latency would be very low, very high, excuse me. So we would like have all of this software related so that we could say like, okay, like you're logging in from New York, like we need to get the closest machine to you, and then that machine is very expensive because it had a graphics card. So how can we share the cost of that machine between you and other people, and then rebalance all of the cloud infrastructure in real time as users would come on and come off and so on. It was very complicated. And if you like pay attention, like a lot of what I'm mentioning are problems that already have solutions for, but we didn't really know about that, so we were kind of building our own, which was also a big mistake that we made.
So does this mean for every user you had to launch a new instance or increase the capacity of the already launched instances?
We would actually have instances waiting because the time to launch an instance is slow, and your browser, we were competing with local browsers, right? So we wanted it to launch really fast. So we had instances waiting, and then we would assign you to one of the instances, and we would try to combine instances so that we would have multiple users on the same instance isolated by Docker containers so that we could optimize our cost because it was very expensive.
So if the instance is already there, so you are paying for something that no one is using at all times.
So not quite. We would have this logic to say, what's the minimum number we like, how can we try to predict demand basically, right? And what's the minimum number of instances we can keep running so that no one has to wait, but we pay the minimal cost.
But if let's say if a user is using Notion on your instance, then or simply web browsing, compared to the same user after 10 minutes moves to something like AutoCAD. So then the usage will go really up, right? How does that work?
Yeah, so we only, so first of all, by that time we only did web browsers, so it was a lot more similar. We no longer did AutoCAD and things like that. But also we had, again, we were like monitoring resource consumption of the Docker containers and trying to allocate things based on how many containers based on how the users were using it. It was a can of worms. Like it was a complete mess. It was so much effort. And it was just very very bad idea. It's the truth. Um, but yeah, those were the challenges we were trying to solve, and that's why I said it was difficult. Like you have a lot of great questions. It's not easy to answer your questions, right? Because it depends on so many factors. And so we were there asking ourselves those questions. And we also, how can we solve these? And we were like, wow, that's so difficult to solve. But when we would find good ways to do it, we were very proud of ourselves. But it actually didn't matter in the long term.
No, I would say I can see the challenge pull for the problem. Like it's very intriguing if you enjoy, let's say, infrastructure and software. Yeah, yeah.
Exactly, exactly. So we had a lot of people that were really into that. We hired some people who were like video streaming geniuses. We hired people who were cloud infrastructure geniuses. And then we put all these people together and they made something amazing. And, probably one day we'll open source the software. Maybe it can benefit other people. But we we didn't have any business geniuses on our team. And I think that was the big mistake we made. That's what was missing.
So when you write so much original software, can it not be used by somebody else or repurposed or something like that?
Yeah, see, that's a good question. We thought at some point that we had written so much software that it was going to be valuable to somebody. Right? We were like, maybe there's no way this is useless fully, but that's not true. Like I don't think that's true. I mean, of course, the more you do, the higher the chance that someone can derive some value from something. But we, software is a mean to solve a problem, right? Like code is worth nothing if it's not helping somebody in some way, right? And if this code was not useful to help people, and so even though there was a lot of it, that didn't mean that it was obviously going to be useful. So we didn't really find a use for it, is the honest answer. Like I still have it, and we open sourced almost all of it by now. And there's like a small part of it that hasn't been open source yet, and probably I'll open source someday and maybe post it online, and maybe some people find a use for it, but we'll see. There's nothing that we thought about, at least. We tried long and hard to find ways to make this useful, and we couldn't think of anything.
So it's on GitHub right now. I can see it.
Yeah, a lot of it is on GitHub. You can go and see it. There's still a big part of it that isn't, like sort of the core of it, because we were waiting to see if we could find a way to make it useful, but we didn't end up. So like I it hasn't been open source just because I haven't gotten around to it. Um, but probably I will sometime. But you can go see a lot of it.
I also always felt if something is so original, if you have solved, these are like technical problems. So what you are saying is there is no company out there who is facing the same problems and can just use the solutions you guys built.
So okay, maybe I can provide a bit more context. The solution that we built is useful in like various ways, but there were already companies that were solving those problems quite well. And so like at the end of it, basically, what came out of Wist is we were talking at the very end, we woke up and we were like, oh my God, like maybe, we should do more sales and try to understand what people want and so on. So we did. And we talked to a lot of people and we kind of discovered a lot of the solutions of what we built were actually useful in cybersecurity rather than in like consumer productivity, like what Mighty and us thought was the initial market for this. And when we started talking to people in cybersecurity, it turns out like there's a lot of companies that have built a product like ours. It was not as good, it was not as pleasant to use, but it worked and it solved the problem. And when you're doing cybersecurity, it doesn't need to be like that pleasant to use, really, right? Because people are kind of forced to use it by their companies. And so they like their products that were out there had a lot of benefits. They were easier to run, they were cheaper and so on. They weren't as incredible as ours, but it worked fine. And so there was kind of no space in the market. So I was a little bit reductive when I was saying like it was useless. I kind of skipped a few steps. Like we reached a point where we found what we had was useful, but there was no room for us to provide that use to people.
I see.
Other companies had already done that and done that successfully.
And one more thing which I'm thinking right now is this sounds like an extremely complex problem because it's like a collection of so many different technical challenges. So when you're running a company like this, when you have so many people on board, how do you not get, like overwhelmed by all the things that are coming your way? Like 10 people working, 30 people working with you. You're also trying to code, you're also trying to solve the problem. You're communicating with everyone. You're also trying to take care of yourself. So how does that work out?
Of trying to do everything.
Yeah, like just trying to keep up because when you are trying to build something like this, something goes wrong almost every day. So how do you keep up with all of that?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not the great person for you to ask this to. I think my mood swings a lot depending on the days. I mean, maybe not that much. I don't know. Like, I think like everything in life is just taking things one step at a time, right? But it's not easy. It's so easy to say, but it's not easy to do, right? So like when we had problems, we would just take the problem and kind of keep going, and then after work I'd be like, okay, like let me do something different. I exercise a lot, so I would exercise a lot to kind of clear my head from like a personal perspective. um but the company was like, okay, like what's next, right? And we kind of kept doing this, what's next. And I think there was some good in that because we didn't give up, because we always focused on a small thing. But there's also some bad in that we only focus on the next step without realizing that the road was leading us in the wrong direction. So I think it's important to look like both at the big picture and at the small picture.
You mentioned you raised 2 rounds. How so? And it was also I'm assuming it was your first time raising funds.
Yeah, that's right.
So how did you navigate that, for example? So what I'm trying to ask here is, you have an idea. This is your first time ever doing something on your own in the market, and there is this person who is so kind to invest in your idea and your company. So did that bother you, or how did you process it when you were, let's say, going to meet them for the first time, pitch your idea, explain them, answer their questions?
Yeah, that's a good question. I wouldn't say those people are so kind. Like they're very self-interested, right? They're investors. They're there to make money. Not saying they're not kind, but I don't think kindness is not the primary thing that's driving them, right? And that's fair. Um, but yes, we were working with some kind investors who wanted to back us. Um, it happened a little bit by accident. Like, so we started the company our senior year of college. That's why I mentioned this. Like, we had the idea when I was interning at Microsoft, and then we started working on it during our senior year. Um, and my co-founder and I, we did this hackathon in over winter break because we were planning on just coding on our product all winter break anyways. And that we heard of this 1 week hackathon. And we were like, if we're just going to work on it in our bedrooms, like might as well work on it with other people. So we did this, and the hackathon was sponsored by this VC. And then people got super interested in our product. We had like other people from the hackathon help us build the product. And then by the end of it, the VC was interested in meeting us, and so they did. So we ended up meeting that VC. At that time, I lived in Boston, and then we went to New York to meet them, and they essentially offered to invest in our company. We hadn't even really thought that much about it by then. Like we had no idea what we were doing at all. We didn't know how much to ask. Didn't know how much we needed to raise. Like we had no idea, to be honest. And that VC was super nice, and they kind of walked us through everything that we needed to know really at that time. They're called Neo. They were very nice to us, at least early on. Kind of sort of showed us how to do it, and so we did the fundraise, like our first round with them, and then kind of got started a bit more seriously after that. I mean, we were going quite seriously before, but like once we had money, we were like, wow, like I guess this is happening. Like it's no longer just a project, right? Like now it's a real thing, and like we hired some friends, and like it kind of really accelerated everything.
This is also one question which I still don't understand. So let's say they fund you, you start working with them, and then 3 years later you conclude that we don't want to continue this project anymore. So how do they respond to that kind of news? Is it a lot of confusion? Is it a lot of questions for you guys? How does that work out?
Yeah, that's a good question. So that depends on the investors. So we did another round after, and by the end, there were three VCs that invested in Wist, my previous company, and we had a bunch of angel investors as well. Every month, we would send them an email, right? That was like, here's what's going on this month. Here's the things that are going well. Here's the things that are not going well. Um, so the honest answer is they knew, right? They knew we were not making money. They knew things were not going that well. So they saw it coming, almost all of them. There was only one investor, the initial one, Neo, that was like a little bit surprised. I think because they perhaps paid a little bit less attention over time, but the other ones actually encouraged us to close. Um, our lead investor that led our second round of funding, by the end of it, like they were like, guys, like I think you gave it a fair shot and you worked really hard on it, but it's clearly not working out. Like that's it, right? And we basically closed because we ran out of money at that time, and so we would have had to like raise more money to keep going, and no one thought that was a good idea, basically. Um, or we would have had to like or we were going to close. And so actually investors were very supportive. I was very surprised. The only VC that was like not was it was a bit taken aback was our initial one, Neo. But all the other ones were like, yeah, like that's the end of the road. And so that's how it is.
Does that surprise you?
I was a little bit surprised because I was mortified to be honest. Right at the end, like I felt really bad for my employees. I felt really bad for the investors. I mean, especially for the employees, right? Because I work with them day to day, and a lot of them were my friends. So I was very very torn about this. Um, but s- so I was expecting the investors to be a little bit mad, but really everyone was very very kind and very supportive, and they were like, "Hey, like happens, y'all try your best." And also, it's not exactly, I think, like some other places where like maybe it was a good idea, but like you lost to a competitor. Like Mighty also shut down. Like everyone that tried to do this shut down, really. So no one, we were all wrong, which I don't know if that's a comforting fact, but it's like not necessarily like we did a bad job, right? Like everybody kind of was wrong in this hypothesis. Um, so I think in that way, perhaps investors were a bit more understanding. But also, when you think about it, like so much of their companies go bust, right? That's the game that you play when you're a venture capitalist. So it happens all the time. So I'm sure, I was not the first one that they saw, and I'm not the last one that they saw that isn't going to work out. So they were probably like, yeah, another domino fell onto the next one.
You mentioned that you exercise a lot, and it really helps you, get over yourself sometimes. So when these investors are being, I would say, not so confrontational, they were actually kind, as we mentioned in the beginning. How did you take it? You did mention you were mortified, but sometimes when you know it's not going to work out, if I was you, I would say not fear exactly, but get very conscious of just sharing the news that okay, this is what we are going to do. So was it difficult for you to face that?
Yeah, it was. I mean, no one likes to admit that they were wrong. Um, but I've been wrong so many times. By that point, I think I was okay with that. But mostly was just I just felt like I had let down people, right? And so all of my friends and the people that were working in the company with us, like they were, as I said, they were really really smart. They were crazy people. A lot of them turned down like crazy good, I should say, right? They were crazy good people, and a lot of them had turned down job offers that was higher paying or XYZ to go and join this, and so they just deserve. I just felt they deserved a better outcome than what we had, right? Like I never cared that much for my personal outcome, I think, but I cared a lot about the outcome I could hopefully bring to the people that decided to believe in us. And unfortunately, I was not able to provide that, right? Because the company shut down. And so needing to tell them that things were going to close was definitely a very difficult moment. I just felt very bad and I was very sad to not be able to provide them that. with the investors, again, I cared a little bit less just because, like, you know, when you work at a company, like this is your everything, right? It's like your main thing. When you're an investor, like the company is one of your many companies. So like they have, it's not as big a pain to them as to the people that like day in, day out spent their whole day working on, on the company. So that was definitely, yeah, that's my biggest regret for sure.
When you started, for example, do you think you had this much sense of responsibility
I don't think
compared to,
so.
let's say, when it all ended?
I don't think I realized back then. Like we were kids, to be honest. We were in college and we were so excited about it. And we had raised money, and then I would like call people, I'd call my friends, and I was like, "Hey, like, you need to come work for us. Like, this is going to be the next big thing." And some people did. And then at some point, Ming is my co-founder. Ming and I started to realize we were like materially impacting people's lives. Like some people like quit jobs to come work for us, and some people like moved. Like some people were like, "I was going to live in San Francisco, but now I'm going to live in New York because I want to do this with you guys," right? And like things like that. And I was like, wow, like because of what we're doing, like some people are, like altering the course that they had envisioned for their lives. And then when that happened, I was like, wow, like this is serious. Like we need to like, be respectful and like cognizant of the sacrifices and the decisions people are doing or are making, on this. So that happened within the first year. But like very early on, I think we hadn't realized that. We were just like focused on the company, and we thought like, these things are like we didn't really have this understanding of like what it would take.
But you know, even after a year, you were still really young. So how did that understanding came about? Is it something happened, like a big event that happened, or you just started noticing these things around you? Because it's difficult to notice these things and take responsibility at the end of it.
I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know. I think I just started noticing them as we were going. It just felt like a big deal. Like when some people were hard to convince, and then they eventually got convinced to join the team, and I had really built an understanding of all the things they were weighing, right? And like the importance of the decision to them, then it became very clear like these were big decisions people were making, right? And like the feeling of responsibility built up more and more over the years. But it definitely started building pretty early on, I think.
And what were the different things they were weighing? Like a different job, like a different city, a different.
Yeah, different jobs, cities, going back to school, doing more school, obviously like financial compensation, right? For some of them, it was also like just like interest and like company culture, things like that. Some were just weighing like whether to, you know, whether to go to a big company or a small company. Some were weighing whether to believe in me and Ming or, so it was just all sorts of different things. The standards, really.
Yeah, yeah. And was it like a, so these are the things I was mentioning. When you are running something, it's just a lot of small things you have to take care of. So did you have like a system to organize all the information? Did you write something down somewhere? How did that happen? Or it was just you and Ming discussing on a regular basis to kind of be on the same page?
Yeah, that's something we didn't do a very good job at initially. It was very ad hoc. Ming and I and a couple other people on the team would like discuss and kind of come to a conclusion and then move forward with it. Especially since we were a very remote company, more than half of our team was remote. Um, we eventually realized we needed to write things down better, so we started writing things in Notion, and tracking the information a lot better, which was useful. Um, but initially, it was like, yeah, just ad hoc.
So it's not just the product, right? All these things also come into play, and you don't realize that this is way too much work than initially expected.
Yeah, you could say that. Yeah, definitely more than initially expected is a fair way to put it.
Let's say Retake is ridiculously young. It's like 3 months old. So how are you guys thinking about Retake, let's say, in terms of the next 3 to 4 months or the next year probably? How does the roadmap or like the vision look like for now?
Yeah, I think I mean, we have this big vision for like how the product should be, but really we've become a lot more pragmatic, I think. Like we're just trying to talk to many people and build something that makes their lives better, right? The number one mistake I don't want to make again is building something that is not useful to anyone, right? Because that's a waste of time and energy and so on. So I wouldn't say we really think in the very, very big picture anymore. Like we're saying, like, how can we make a big difference tomorrow, right? And then in 2 days and in 3 days, right? So we're just trying to talk to people, build something that they like, that is useful to them. And I feel pretty confident if we do that from the beginning, like the journey will kind of carry itself in a way that is very, very good. But there's always more that you can do, and there's more that people will ask for, and then there's more, teams will want to work with, and team members will want to work with us, and so on. Like a lot of the things that we felt we had to like handle at Wist, I think they kind of take care of themselves if you're like really building a company in the right way. So,
So how is, so essentially, is it fair to say it's a database company?
um, we call ourselves a search company, but we're very close. Yeah, very close to that. Yeah, we're in the vector database realm.
And is this also heavy on the infra side, or it's more like a software layer?
Yeah, well, a little bit of both. Like we're an infra product, so it's gonna go in your backend infrastructure stack to power your product if you're one of our customers. This is just something grown to be pretty knowledgeable about from building Wisp, and so an area where we think we can do things quite well. Yeah,
Would you share, let's say, some of your experience with YC? How has YC been? What are you guys learning, and how is the whole environment right now?
sure, sure. Happy to. Yeah, YC's been great so far. We quite like it. I mean, we're halfway through, a little more than halfway through now, which is crazy. The caliber of the other founders in YC is very, very impressive. Um, People are really good. It's We learn from our peers, and also it's like always like a little motivation boost to like try to be better, right? Which is great. The partners are very good. We've learned a lot from our partners. They helped us in the transition from our previous idea to this idea. They're very encouraging. um, and then YC also has like the community, I think, is a big benefit as well, right? Like a couple of the people we work with, like we've gotten a lot of leads for potential customers via YC and things like that. I think it depends what you're making, but like especially for software products, they've definitely done things quite well.
And how would you describe your, I would say, schedule right now? Is it a lot of meetings and also trying, like, how do you juggle between talking to customers and also building at the same time?
It's a bit of both. It's a bit of both. Yeah, we like I try to do meetings in the afternoon, because I'm a little bit more tired then, and so like slower on the programming or things like that. I mean, my co-founder does much more programming than me. He's a lot better at it, and so we kind of split our responsibilities in this way as well.
Does it happen that, sometimes, a lot of times, you just are not able to prioritize? In the sense, yes, you have a scheduled meeting, but you don't want to do it. So does that happen a lot?
The last schedule meetings that I don't want to do.
Yeah, sometimes, you schedule something like a week or 2 weeks ago, but then when it actually happens, you're like, man, not right now.
Sure, sure, that does happen, but I think it's important to follow your commitments. So I follow my commitments, right? And also, like like I think people have a bit of a routine. At least I certainly do. Like I try to schedule things in a way that I think is most likely I'll be like in a good mood to do it, if that makes sense, right? So like however my schedule is this week is like not that different from how it is in 2 weeks. Like it's a bit different, but not that much. And so I know a certain time of the day where I'm more likely to enjoy taking meetings. So I kind of try to book them then.
And in the Notion note you wrote, you mentioned the importance of having a support system around yourself. Would you like to share why why did you put it out there in that note?
Yeah. So what I wrote is so I was mentioning, when I wrote this Notion doc about kind of our learnings from the first company, I was mentioning how I feel like I have a support system with my family, for example, right? Or with some friends for when things are going well and not going well. I think that's pretty important because I think it's important no matter what you do. Like, like whether you're a founder or an employee or an athlete or a musician, like whatever it is, like, life is full of ups and downs, right? And like, I think there's maybe some jobs that will bring more ups and downs than others, but even, quote unquote regular jobs, like bring ups and downs, right? And I think it's good to have people who are there to support you sort of, unequivocally, like no matter how well things are going, right? Because investors, for example, or like, people that are very close to you, like they support you especially well when things are going well. And when things are not going well, like you become less relevant, right? Which is fair. Like, it's business, right? But it's good to have people who are there to support you no matter how things are going. And what I found is my family is actually like they're pretty far removed from the whole like startup world. And that's kind of a very refreshing perspective, right? Because I talk to other people in the startup world, and you know, like people just know a lot, and so the conversation skews in very interesting ways. Versus like when you are people that kind of like know very little about the startup world, they can't really ask you questions that deep about it. So the conversation centers more around sort of higher level, like how things are going in life, how you're feeling, things like that, which is a very refreshing to have a different perspective, like sort of leave the bubble, right? So that's something that I think is actually quite important. At least it's important to me. And the truth is, like that, a lot of things that feel like big deals aren't big deals in the big scale of things when you can kind of relativize, right? And so, like, companies live and die and people are fine. And then, like, jobs, you get hired and fired and then, things are fine. And so, like, not saying these aren't like really sad or challenging moments, but if you have the right people around you, they can kind of help you realize that you'll be okay, right?
I relate to this because a lot of times, let's say it's like 11:30 in the night, and I'm really worked up. I'm trying to process what happened, what I need to do tomorrow, and then my dad would usually calls around that time, and the only question he asks is, "Did you have tea today?"
Mm.
And I was like, "Right, that's what's
Yeah,
important."
exactly, right?
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so it's good to be able to relativize like this. Like your dad sounds like a great person. I think it's like a good question to ask, right? And at the end of the day, we're all gonna be fine.
Like a lot of times, I would say I burst out laughing because I'm like, oh my god, it was this simple. What? Because when you are in it, you create this whole thing in your head, which is not even there.
Exactly.
And you also meant you mentioned you right after college you started on this crazy journey, right? I forgot to ask you, did you guys understand how to manage finances for the company at the time?
No, not really, I think. But we were like, so I think there's different extremes to managing finances. We were basically still thinking like college students. So we were very frugal. We paid ourselves very little,
Yeah,
too little,
you
I
you,
think.
you wrote that in the note as well.
Yeah, we paid ourselves too little. Um, we were very wary of spending money because when I was in college, like I wasn't broke, but I wasn't rich, right? Like I was like I would be careful with how I spent my money, basically, right? Um, and I tried not to spend too much. Um, and that's kind of how we thought about it at the company as well. And I think some of it is good, right? Like you don't want to be the person that like flames your VC funding on like really stupid things. But at the same time, like you got to spend money to make money. Like that's just, people say this and it's true, right? Like you got to hire people, you got to like purchase tools and things so that people can be productive at their jobs and, so on and so forth. And like, we were just like very slow, I think, at doing this, at least initially. Like, I think if we had spent that money a little bit faster, we could have like come to those answers perhaps a little bit faster and wasted a little bit less time.
And do you think because you were not burning your money away, your VCs were kinder to you probably?
Maybe. I mean, some of our VCs told us to spend more money faster so that we could like, or not necessarily spend more money, but like we would sort of come to them with kind of mundane questions like, should we save like $2,000 on this thing? And they were like, that doesn't really matter, in the big scale of things, because at the end of the day, it's like either like you have millions, right? And it's like either you're right and you found a real problem, and then if you found a real problem and you've spent like an extra $20,000, it's not a big deal. Like a real problem is hopefully worth a lot of money, right? Or like at the end you haven't found a real problem, and whether you had like an extra month of money because you were a little bit, that's not gonna be enough time anyways to find that problem. So it doesn't matter. Um, but I do think our VCs understood that we were like, we really tried. We really, really tried our best. And we really were a little bit too selfless in trying, I think. And I think our VCs understood that. And so they were perhaps a little bit more kind in that way because they felt that like our heart was in the right place, let's say.
And you mentioned your family is not very in the startup world. So how did they respond to you guys getting funded?
Oh, a lot of them were like, what the hell? Like they thought it was pretty crazy actually. I mean, it is kind of crazy, right? Because we hadn't even graduated from school yet, and like people were like giving us, hundreds of thousands of dollars to like do this thing that we had thought in our heads, and so people were like, what the hell?" Like that happens, right? So people, yeah, definitely. My dad was super surprised. Um, a couple of people were like, yeah, quite surprised.
How did they have questions? Like what kind of questions did they have?
I mean, I think the first question was like, "So what are you doing exactly?" Right? Because like
That's when they actually try to understand.
no, but they did before, but I also did a bad job explaining it back then. I think I mentioned this in my Notion doc as well. Like for a long time we couldn't explain super well what we were doing and who it was for. And so like they didn't quite get it. And I think the reason they didn't quite get it is because also I didn't quite get it, right? Like our team didn't quite get it. And so but when we like managed to convince, VCs to invest in us, they were like, okay, like somebody has gotten something enough to be willing to make these big decisions. So like I kind of, you're like more interested in really trying to understand. So that happened. I mean, it was not super much, but they were like, it was definitely they were surprised. Yeah, it was unheard of, before, let's say.
Like, for you guys, you were just kids in college. So you were like, yeah, this is how the new world works. But for them, right, who has actually seen life, it must be completely crazy.
Yeah, and they like I live pretty far from them now, since I left for college and so on. So they only see like they don't see the day to day, right? They only see the broad strokes, right? So it's like, oh, like Phil is in his senior year and didn't like his internship, and then like 2 months later Phil has like hundreds of thousands of dollars to the startup, and they're like, well, how did that happen?
And how long do you think it took them to understand it fully? Like, oh, this happened. Like, you got funded and you're trying to build this. Like in the beginning, I feel I'm sure you try to explain them, but it takes a while to get it.
No, I think they got it pretty quickly. Like they understood how the industry works. um they were just surprised, but I think they like became they got it pretty quickly.
How how did they respond when you mentioned that we are moving on to the next thing?
They were very supportive, but they also had heard me complain, for 3 years about things not working out fully as well as we were hoping. So just like, I mean, I talk to my family pretty often, and so just like the VCs kind of saw their monthly emails, like my family saw it coming too. Like I'd come back for Christmas and they'd be like, "How's it going?" And I would tell them, "Well, not that well, right?" And then I call my parents like every week or so, and they were like, so they knew. No one was surprised.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, it was nice. It's very nice. I would say thank you for writing the note. It's very
Oh,
nice.
well, if I'm glad you found it interesting and useful. I wish for you to make much fewer mistakes than I made. If it can help save you at least one of these mistakes, it will have been time well spent. I wrote it initially for myself, as I said, but I ended up sharing it with more people, and it seems like people have found it somewhat interesting. And so I'm glad. Hopefully you don't waste the time and the money that I did.
Yeah, Do you have any thoughts towards the end?
No, thank you for having me. It was great chatting with you. Had a good
It was
time.
very nice. How did you feel answering all the questions I asked?
No, it was great. I thought you asked great questions. I enjoyed talking with you. Happy to have spent the time chatting.